Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it will be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Keeping me up at night with your parties? Enjoy being shamed on the national news. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to two young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal. Except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young again, etc., so I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining, or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spent about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all the time. So I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party. But I'm pretty chill and know that living in a city, some noise is to be expected. So they are having their party, and I can stand some noise and music. But this party was so wild. People shouting full on in the hallway, wrecking things, etc., etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect their company 20 plus people to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up at 6 every single day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't, and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party, and then did another one the day after. At this point, I have been going a full 3 nights without sleep, and I was nearing neurosis. Every night I had talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place, because it would be absolutely packed with people, and I work with some very vulnerable people at work who I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. This was pre-tests, pre-vaccines, pretty much of the knowledge we now have about COVID. Luckily, the weekend came, and they went to their parents and I could recover a little bit. Suffice to say, I wasn't really liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night. And by constant, I mean constant. Like their bell would ring 70 times a night, and people would always be coming or going. And those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone, and any noise will travel throughout the building. Basically, I couldn't rely on sleep at night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday, because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. During one night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbor and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important bit of information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was because they used their apartment as a makeshift bar/hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere or wanted to see their other friends and so on. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls. Then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pisky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police dozens of times. Most of the time they weren't let in and the police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling as we wanted the record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, the police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. And this is what I did. Most places, students' unions, police, town hall, were understanding but couldn't really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' dean. I sent him a nice email about being sorry to bother him and taking up his time. But I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time, especially since me and my neighbor were about to go to the papers with this story. As secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. This dean called me back right away and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued and we finally got to sit down with the girls. They finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, to be honest. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times. They were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were €300 each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called him up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, that's your problem. You are still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge and we got to vent. But we kept it kinda nice and parted on good terms, hoping that this would be it and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically, what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly less people running to and from, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave. And these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy, while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work who were forbidden from even going to their own freaking family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. Just to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things moved fast. Local news actually picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me and we gave some background information. They confirmed with the police that the cops have been to our address dozens of times and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day the piece was on their site. It went viral there. and got promoted to the sides of most national newspaper. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning that dozens of times police had shown up and also mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already had prepared on paper, and informed us they would investigate and could possibly start disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university to the printed articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was waiting at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same, since this was getting pretty big now. But they made the segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times, and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. Best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in, and said on camera exactly what we were accusing them of towards the university, that they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in and that they had done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer, thankfully the press died down some time later, and the disciplinary action from the university went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends, because we put in a kinda good word for them. They got the lighter end of the stick, 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every single time I got one. The sad part is, most of them sounded just like dumb young kids, but that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. The rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learned that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. Next story. Do not screw with the Dominoids. A long time ago in a state far, far away, a college town in a Midwestern state in the early 80s, our little pizza shop had a big problem with a couple of frat houses. Actually, a lot of the pizza and delivery places had problems with the frat houses. That was in all likelihood the big problem was a few bad apples, but there were a couple of houses that seemed to have an even higher jerks quotient. The issue for us was related to our 30 minutes or free policy, long since discontinued, and the thought that with some trickery and lying, you might be able to get a pizza without handing over any cash. Since we were meticulous about times and did in fact give away pizza when it was late, the occasional people that tried to get a free pizza without having it be late got exactly what was coming to them. Usually a visit from the cops if they got too out of hand. A stern rebuke from a manager was usually enough though. But one house in particular seemed to have quite a few bad orders. Sometimes I would come into work and there would be a note by the phone for this particular house. Let's just call it jerk. The note would say something like, we are no longer taking orders from anyone in the jerk frat. On a really rare occasion, tonight we're not taking orders from any frat. Yeah, they were that problematic. I have nothing to compare this to, but try to imagine the chaos. One night in particular, one of our drivers comes back from the jerk frat house, not just with the unpurchased pizza, but with piss all over him. Seems he got to the house on time, and rather than go through the usual I'm a real jerk and want to challenge your time even though it's been like 10 minutes. They simply refused to open the door. It was a 2-story house, and this guy was persistent. When he went to a side door, they opened a window above him and dumped it on him. Making things worse, this driver was a hard-working, redneck-looking kind of guy. Everyone in the shop loved working with him. He had a great attitude and was the kind of person who would be there for you if you needed him. Dumping piss on him was the last straw. So the manager calls the cops and they drive over to the jerk frat house, and the stage is set. The door is answered by a lone jerk member who comes across as just your honest, hard-working college guy who's really sorry for the confusion. The cop inquires if he's aware that someone dumped piss on the driver, and this guy conveys that yes, he's aware, and that they are all sorry. They didn't mean to do it. It was a college prank gone bad. Oh, Chuck's kind of manner. The cop asks, which person here did it? Chuck somehows around and finally confesses that, in fact, it was he, the poor hard-working college guy that did it, and he is really very sorry. So my manager looks at the cop and more or less conveys that it is time to throw the book at Oh Shucks. They slap the cuffs on him, and to his fratmates' dismay, he's tucked into a squad car. And everyone heads down to the local police station for a booking that will involve a weekend in jail, or someone bailing this guy out. It is not going to be something a simple apology solves. In other words, they are taking this guy's confession when a carload of jerk frat guys arrives at the station, asking to see the cop that's doing the intake paperwork. My manager is still there with the driver, and this is where the revenge portion really kicks in. This wasn't even planned, and I can only imagine that the cops were really sick of the jerk frat nonsense, because what happens next would have been awesome to catch on a cell phone video. Believe it or not, there was a time when such things were not commonplace. Two, the arriving jerk party are having a rare moment of guilty conscience, and proceed to confess to the officer that it's not Oh Shucks who dumped the piss, but in fact it was them. The cop proceeds to take their confession down, verifies on all ends that yes, in fact it was these two clowns, and not Oh Shucks who dumped the piss. Everyone is in agreement. So they book the two guys and put them in jail for the night. By this time it's well past midnight. Then Oh Shucks, after lamenting about how he wishes it wouldn't have come to this, why wouldn't we all just accept an apology for this? It was just a harmless prank. He goes to leave. Where are you going? Says the cop. I'm free to go, aren't I? Says Oh Shucks. The cop proceeds to book Oh Shucks for some kind of false witness charge, and he joins his two buddies for the night. Later that night, a bunch of mindless vandalism happens to the jerk house, sometime in the wee hours of the morning. Say after some late night pizza people are done cleaning their store. From what I remember, it involved some kind of construction bridge paint being applied to the bricks and windows of their house. It's been a while and I wish I could have seen the application. I just remember seeing the house for weeks, messed up with big block letters and paint on the windows. And it doesn't really end there. The university ended up revoking those jerks' right to have a house on campus. Next story. Karen demands I get out of my wheelchair. One of my first posts on here was about a Karen demanding I get out of my power wheelchair to let her son have a go, and then freaking out when I said no. I'd only had one other encounter with her since that happened, which I hoped would have been my last. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Megatron Karen strikes again. I'm a C4 to 5 incomplete quadriplegic, and although I have use of my upper body, I still rely on my power wheelchair to get me around town. I recently received a new power wheelchair and I'm still getting used to using it. And although it looks slightly different than my old one, it is still a Karen magnet. This happened a few days ago when I was downtown doing some shopping. As I was leaving the mall, I saw Karen and her son, 12 years old, walking in. I wanted to turn and go the other way, but she'd already seen me. In hindsight, I should have stayed in the mall and waited for her to lose sight of me. But at that moment, I just wanted to get as far away from her as possible. So I exited the mall, hoping that Karen wouldn't follow me. But I wouldn't be telling this story if that were the end of it. There is a discount clothing shop just outside the mall, which I plan to go to. So that's where I went. I was in there for a few minutes when I got the feeling that someone was watching me. So I turned to see Karen and her son near the entrance and Karen glaring at me. When I looked at her, she immediately looked away, pretending that she was shopping. I headed to the plus-size section, hoping that she'd lose sight of me. But in retrospect, that was a bad idea. I called her Megatron Karen for a reason. When I got to the plus-size section, I naively thought I was safe. But oh no, dear readers, it had only just begun. I started looking through the selection on the racks when, not long after, I got that same feeling that I was being watched. I looked around and saw Karen at the end of the aisle. She was looking at me. But when she saw me see her, she looked away. Then came a strange game of cat and mouse. I went to another aisle and she followed me. I went back the other way and she followed me. To avoid causing a scene, I left the store, hoping to outrun her. Unfortunately though, I was not that lucky. As I left the store and was going down the block, I got that same feeling as before. So I turned around and wouldn't you know it, there she was. What the hell is wrong with you, lady? Why are you following me?
Excuse me? I'm not following you.
Okay then. And I started going in the opposite direction to call her bluff. And guess what? That lunatic followed me. I could hear her coming up close behind me, so I stopped short, causing her to run straight into the back of my wheelchair. The sounds that followed were very satisfying, as she hit her knee hard into the bar that's at the back of my chair, hit her belly directly into a hook that's near the top where a headrest can be placed, and she almost fell in an attempt to correct her balance.
What's wrong with you? You could have killed me.
That wouldn't have happened if you weren't following me. Now what do you want? After muttering incoherent slurs in anger and pain from getting front-ended by the back of my chair,
You insolent little… Get out of that wheelchair now, before I call the cops on you for assault.
Really, lady? How about you take a look above your head? Pointing to the CCTV camera directly outside the store that I stopped in front of. That will show you following me. As well, the one inside the store we were in before, and the mall you followed me out of. Please, Karen, call the police. I dare you. Now Karen getting dead silent. I add, better yet, how about I call the police and press charges on you for harassment? Throughout this entire encounter, her son was trailing behind her with his tail between his legs, with a look of embarrassment and shame on his face for what his mother was doing. So far, Karen is still keeping her mouth shut. Me getting out my phone to take a picture of her face. This picture is time-stamped with my location. If I ever see you again, you will leave me the heck alone, or I will show this to the police, who will be more than happy to review the cameras. Karen just stared at me like a deer caught in the headlights, with her mouth doing a brilliant goldfish impression. Then I left to continue my shopping. Thankfully, I haven't seen her since then, but I hope she took my threat seriously. I didn't want to take things further because that will probably get dogs involved, Australians' version of CPS. But if anything else happens, I will be sure to post it. Thank you for listening. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.